Hello learners, this is Habeeba with Excelwithme. If you like the video, please do like, share, subscribe and comment below. Let's start today's class, that is research paper, that is research methodology, under which research proposal and research report with the subtopic criteria of evaluation. Let's discuss. Just as a research exercise adopts a scientific process, there are scientific ways of evaluating it. Unless research is scientifically evaluated, the implications cannot be assessed properly. Also, the researcher's hard work will remain unacknowledged. An understanding of the criteria for evaluation of research report is reinforcement of the understanding of the entire process, techniques and tools of research. Obviously, when we are doing any research, if evaluation is done and some credits are given to us, that will be reinforcement for us to do furthermore in the research field. Now, evaluation of research reports is carried out for various purposes, including award of degree in the case of research leading to a master degree like MA, MED or MPhil or PhD. As in any evaluation, we need a set of criteria for evaluating the quality of a research report. For that matter, for any work, maybe in studies or education or any work, we need some evaluation. So, there should be here in the research report, there should be a criteria. It is necessary because the criteria help us to judge the adequacy of the research report, guide the researcher to undertake research in a planned manner, identify previous research that may require further validation by using different tool or a different setting, and guide the preparation of a good research report. So, these are the main points why we need this criteria. First is judge the adequacy, whether it is adequate or not. Then planned manner, to undertake anything in a planned manner. Then previous research validation, this is so that we can take the tools or a different setting. It will guide us in a good research report. Now, first one, introductory chapter, building the rationale. As a reviewer, you may first like to identify there is any bias. Obviously, first we will check it out, any biasness is there. Also, the extent of the bias and its likely impact on the research process and findings. The entire chapter should be seen from several angles. The broad framework of education or related area of education laid out. Secondly, the strength of arguments to justify the study. Selection of the problem is very important. Credit points are given to that also. Then, skill in narrowing down to the identification of the problem and the presence of biases issues. Finally, the test of the quality of an introductory chapter is its ability to convince the reader and the reviewer that the problem chosen is relevant, important, timely, researchable and with the competence of the researcher. So, these are the 5 criteria for the first chapter, introductory one. Should these criteria be fulfilled, the chapter on introduction should be considered to have done well. Secondly, review of literature. Research reports or papers comprise 3 major elements: an introduction justifying the research, methodological details and findings and their implications. So, a competent reviewer should touch upon all 3 elements, though most reviewers use only findings. Very few researchers look into findings as well as the research methodology in their reviews. Generally, we take only the findings of we take the problem, the person and the findings. But the best quality should be, we should check out the methodology also. From the angle of findings, major objectives of a review are to find gaps in research, to identify the areas of overlap, to identify contradictions. The second major purpose of review is to derive guidelines for the methodology of research. From the methodology perspective, the review of research literature should help the researcher to be able to derive implications for sample, that is sampling technique, sample size, etc. Then research designs, then variables to be studied, scaling technique, research instruments, data collection, then statistical or qualitative techniques for data analysis. Now, while you evaluate a report, you may like to check whether the researcher has adequately analyzed and reflected on the previous research studies from the various aspects of research methodology listed above. Further, does he or she indicate his or her decision to choose the research designs, variables, etc. backed up by previous studies? If so, the purpose of review has been well achieved. If not, it is merely a ritual. Now, the better approach is when a researcher develops a conceptual framework of his or her research in a particular field. The conceptual framework is built on the theoretical literature and creative argumentation. Within this framework, the researcher maps out the previous research. Fitting it into a conceptual framework allows him or her to compare and contrast issues and findings, identify the gaps, overlaps, contradictions, and also derive methodological implications. Now, the third one, we have understood about the introduction and the review of literature. The third one is objectives and hypothesis. An evaluator, while evaluating the research objectives, needs to examine clarity of expression, measurability, and comprehensiveness of the objectives and judiciousness in choosing and stating them. One important task of the evaluator is to check whether the researcher has provided sound backup from the previous research and findings and important theoretical analysis to justify his or her formulation of hypothesis. For the purpose of evaluation, it is important to examine whether the choice of hypothesis, that is null or directional, was logical and whether the researcher has adequately argued out his or her case. The hypotheses are testable, that is very important. The hypotheses are stated clearly, indicating one-to-one relationship between two or more variables, and in case of a multivariation situation, the relationship of the cluster of independent variables, vice versa. The criterion variable is well defined. Now, the fourth one is choice of research design. An evaluator of a research report needs to examine the appropriateness of the choice of research design, vice versa, the research objectives. Now, the details of the design, example, type of experimental design, etc., too have to be evaluated. Now, equally important is the argument put forward by the researcher in deciding the research design. Now, the fifth one is choice of variables. An important consideration in evaluation is how meticulously the variables have been identified and classified under the three categories. Choice of variables is an important step in a research project. There can be at least three sets of variables, namely independent, dependent, and intervening variables. There are also other ways of classifying variables like socio-economic, demographic, psychological, organizational, etc. Now, the later classification is relevant with regard to basic content of research, whereas the former is directly linked to research methodology. That is, variables related to dependent, independent, and intervening, they are directly linked to methodology, how you deal with them while analyzing research data. The second important consideration in this case is whether the researcher has provided operational definitions of at least such variables as do not have a standard meaning in the literature, obviously. The third important consideration is whether there are clear indications of the measurability of variables. Now, the sixth one is research instrumentation. Several types of research instruments have been discussed. There are psychological tests, achievement tests, questionnaires, opinionaires, information blanks, inventories, interview schedules, etc. For the purpose of evaluating a research report, the important consideration is whether the instrument chosen or developed is appropriate for measuring the variables or not. Now, the seventh one, sample. As an evaluator, what is to be considered is whether the sample size is large enough for the study, and the sample size has been determined scientifically is the question here. An evaluator needs to carefully evaluate the explanation provided by the researcher and the way he or she proposes to cope with it. The important point to check here is whether the researcher has identified the right and relevant criteria for stratification and substratification of the population and then developed a sampling frame to choose a stratified random sample using appropriate randomization. Now the eighth one is data collection and analysis. The points to check here are whether the researcher has categorically recorded the details of data collection, that is research instruments administered personally or by a representative or by mail. Second, sources and authenticity of secondary data and the kind of problems that the data might have in terms of quality. Ninth one, findings and implications. The important issue of evaluation here is to critically examine the way a researcher interprets findings. This is where an evaluator examines the analytical skill of a researcher, the skill of extrapolation, the skill of observing and explaining relationships between two or more variables, etc. 10th one, summary and conclusions. This is a common chapter in all research studies. It provides a quick glimpse of the entire research project. Brevity with comprehensiveness is the rule of the game for this chapter. An evaluator often examines within the small space of a summary how a researcher has built the rationale, how he or she has documented the objectives, hypothesis, research methodology and findings. 11th one is referencing. There is a difference between a bibliography and references. In the previous class we have understood research reports require references and not bibliography. Many students commit the mistake of providing references under the heading of bibliography. In text references not listed at the end of the chapter or the thesis is a strong negative point of a quality research work. 12th one is annexures. An important component of a research report is annexures. And annexures usually contain the research instruments, sampling frame, instructional material that might have been used for experimentation, etc. Excuse me. Annexures are also serialized. The main purpose of the annexures is that an evaluator can check the actual quality of the research instrument and material that have been used by the researcher. Please excuse me. Annexures need to be fully documented and also serialized as indicated in the content of the research report. Thus, the checkpoints are the comprehensiveness and serialization of the annexures. Serially, they should be put. Now, general indicators. There are issues that need to be considered such as language, typographical errors, that is while typing, then presentation, etc. Some of these issues are language and expression, including correctness of syntax, spelling, etc., grammar, etc. Typing, word processing and printing of the report, then readability including margins, line spacing, type, font and size, placement of tables, diagrams, illustrations and graphs, then binding and overall getup. Now, format for evaluation of research reports. In order to use the format, we have to go through each criterion and give relevant score in the box. If a particular criterion is not applicable for a research report, we must mention the same. While calculating the maximum score for evaluation, we must subtract the scores for the criteria that are not applicable for the specific research report. Add the total scores given for the different criteria and then use the following formula for calculating, that is quality index. That is research report quality index equal to score obtained multiplied by 100 divided by maximum actual score. This we have to remember. Suppose all the criteria were included in evaluating a research report, then the maximum actual score would be 65. If the report gets a grand total score of 48, then the research report quality index score is 73.84. If the maximum actual score taken into consideration is 55, and the grand total score in all the categories is 48, the research report quality index score is 87.27. a research report evaluation pro forma which by and large covers all the major points. Let's see the pro forma here. It looks like this. I have discussed everything. Introduction. Is the problem clearly stated? Yes or no? Maximum score 6 here. 1 to 6 rows are there here. Then subtotal. Actual maximum marks are given. If anything is not applicable, it will be given over here, not applicable. And then scores are given here, yes or no, like that. So, like this, everything. Second, review of literature. Maximum score 9. The previous one, score points here, maximum score 6. Review of literature, maximum score 9. Objectives and hypothesis, maximum 12. Research design 3. Variables, maximum 3. Research instruments 5. Sample 3. Data collection and analysis 4. Findings and implications 5. Summary and conclusions 3. Referencing 5. Then annexures 3. Then general indicators 4. So this is all about the evaluation of the research report. We need to understand about if we are going to send our report for any review, how they are going to give us the points. If you like the video, please do like, share, subscribe and comment below. I'll come up with the next class in the next video. Thanks for your attention and time. Happy learning.